All right, we'll get rolling. With more than a decade of sales, retail management, and business analytic experience in the craft beverage industry, Aaron Gore loves the opportunities he has every day to make a difference for small business owners across the country. He is the Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Beer 30, one of the drinks industry's leading software providers. He's a co-founder of the Court Shoes Only Charitable Collaboration Beer, and serves as the Vice President of the American Craft Beer Hall of Fame. He is an advanced Cicerone, certified Sommelier. Is that how you say that?
That's Sommelier.
Sommelier, which I looked up. That's a cider expert for those of you. Certified Cheese Scholar. I knew that.
It's a real thing, by the way.
WSET Level 2 Spirit certified and is AFNA Beer certified. Additionally, he is an active industry advocate, public speaker, beer and cider educator, and the father of 2 daughters who are the true passion of his life until they get a little older.
And they're fucking terror. They're gone.
So please everyone say hello to Aaron Gore. Here we go, Aaron.
Yeah, look at that, man. With all the enthusiasm of the world, Chris, good Lord, how can you not be excited coming in? Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, for teaching the teachers. I know it's the last session of the conference, and you are already 100% fucking checked out. But we're going to get through this together. Hopefully you can learn something and have a good time doing it. But been fortunate enough to know a few of you, and for those of you who I've not been fortunate enough to meet yet, I'm sure you're asking yourself, who the hell is this guy and why should I care? I mean, you got my full read-up, but a little additional feedback on me. Been in the industry for a little over 15 years, most of that running breweries. I've only been on the software side for the last couple, but yes, Vice President of Sales and Marketing for the Fifth Ingredients, makers of Beer 30, as well as co-founder and Vice President of the American Craft Beer Hall of Fame. But much of my career was doing sales and operations for breweries, as well as 6 years as a full-time consultant. And in that time, I was fortunate enough to work with breweries on 6 continents. I've been very fortunate to really gain a lot of insights and a lot of really benefit from the trial and error of dozens, maybe even hundreds of breweries across the world, and get to see a lot of the things that they're doing right, but also get to see a lot of the things that they're doing wrong, and ways that we can work towards an industry that's a little more sustainable and a little more mature. And one of the areas that a lot of breweries are not necessarily doing well is in terms of training their team, staff education. A core foundational thing for running a successful brewery. But before we start talking about how to do that successfully, we should probably be talking about why that's important in the first place. So why is staff education important? Well, at the end of the day, it's not important for its own sake. We're not just trying to teach people for the sake of feeling good about ourselves, patting ourselves on the back. We're trying to help people do their jobs better. And a well-trained staff is one that has all of the tools that they need in order to be as effective as possible. A lot of us are coming into this industry from outside industries, outside roles, and we're trying to figure out how to do these things well. And that means that we need to have a holistic understanding, not just of the products we carry, but of the companies that we work for, and of the best practices and ways that we can be as effective as we can be in those roles. But it doesn't just help them do their jobs, it also helps them reinforce your brand and your company as a whole, because at the end of the day, your bar staff, your delivery drivers, your salespeople, as well as your brewers are all a touch point for people who are engaging with your company likely for the first time. They need to understand how you're positioning your company. They need to understand what makes it important. They need to understand what you do well, what you don't focus on, and why that is, because they're going to be those people's introduction to everything about your business, and you need to make sure that they're able to represent it properly. It's also critical for cutting down on mistakes. We're all small businesses. We're all wearing way too many hats and just flying by the seat of our pants. I get it. But the more that we have an understanding of what we're doing, and not just what we're doing, but why we are doing it, the more that we're able to find creative solutions, cut down on mistakes, and make sure that we're finding ways to get to the results that we need that aren't necessarily going to lead to dead weight loss or lead down blind alleys or lead us into positions where you're now playing remediation as opposed to pushing forward and really innovating within the business. Makes beer quality better too. Now, I don't just mean beer quality as far as does your beer taste good. Far too often we have a tendency to equate beer quality with beer that tastes good, but any asshole can make a beer that tastes good. It takes a real good brewer to make beer that tastes good consistently and beer that tastes good for an affordable amount. I mean, if you have the most expensive ingredients in the world, it's a lot easier to make things taste good. It's when you have to work with what you have, within the budget you have, with the price that you're able to charge the customer that you really shine, and a well-educated team is able to do that far more effectively. Also helps keep your staff engaged. A well-engaged staff can be somewhere between 10 and 14% more productive. Now, what does that mean in real terms? That means that the job that they are doing, they will be able to get 10 to 14% more productivity, more output out of. So imagine the team that you have now, paying them what you are paying now, with the hours that you have available now, and getting 10 to 14% more out of them, more beer, more revenue, more service. That's critical in an industry that oftentimes doesn't have enough money to go around, enough margin to go around. Those little differences make an enormous difference on the business as a whole. When people are educated, when they understand why they're doing what they're doing, when they understand the background, when they feel like they are prepared and have the tools that they need, they are more engaged. It's also good for creating opportunities for those people because, far too often in this industry, it's a relatively flat organization. A lot of times you have a brewer, maybe even a brewer owner, and you only have one or two levels of abstraction there. So being able to give people the tools they need to take that into new responsibilities, new roles, maybe even new jobs elsewhere, that's critical because a good manager isn't necessarily determined by what the people working under them do, but about what those people go on to do when they do leave you. I mean, we're a feeder industry. We're an industry filled with people who understudied and worked at various breweries and then went on to found their own or work at larger facilities or work in areas and jobs that they're more passionate about, and the number of bartenders who go on to become brewers or salespeople or operations head. That's really how this industry is built on. If you give them the tools early, they can rise to the occasion. And then last, it gives you the ability to get around some of that back of house, front of house thing that you have at every restaurant or brewery in Asheville. How many people in the room are brewers? Can you raise your hand real quick? If I ask you what you think of salespeople, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Fuck those guys? Yeah, salespeople and brewers don't always get along. Bartenders and brewers are only slightly better. And there's a reason for that. You're often at cross paths and you're not necessarily interacting. Things need to get siloed. So when you have a well-educated staff, they understand and appreciate what goes into the brew day, what goes into making this beer. And contrarily, when the people in the brew house are able to engage in some of that training and education, it really helps push forward that relationship and helps keep everyone working together as part of a whole, because business only succeeds when everyone's working together. But before we get into any of the ways of how to run a staff education program, I'm going to go ahead and get on a soapbox for a second, so bear with me. So, everything that you sell requires the exact same amount of care as the beer that you sell. There's nothing more frustrating than going to a brewery. I'm going to get off this chair now before I break the fucking neck, but there's nothing more frustrating than going to a brewery with someone who only drinks wine, and you order a beer, and you get 30 minutes of explanation of every facet of that beer, what it's made with, every hop that goes in it, the entire brew schedule, the history of it, the marketing of it, the storytelling, everything about it, and then your wine-loving friend says, well, what do you have for wine? And they say, we've got a white and a red. Because the problem is, they might be there for an entirely different experience than you are. If you're engaging with the beer, you're having the time of your life, but they aren't having a good experience. But they're still at your facility, and they're still spending money at your facility, because at the end of the day, in this industry, far too often we misunderstand what our business model actually is. I'm on the Business Resources Committee for the Brewers Association. One of the things we talk about is the fact that, if I were to ask the average brewer what your business model is, a lot of folks would say, well, we make and sell beer. That's not your business model. For almost 90% of breweries, your number one source of revenue, and for significantly more than that, your number one source of profit, is your tap room. Your business model is selling stuff over your bar. Your brew house is a way of clawing back part of the margin that would otherwise be going to a third party. When you look at it through that lens, all of a sudden a lot of your considerations become significantly different, but it also means that whether you're selling your own beer, or you are selling wine, or you are selling seltzer, or THC products, or you are selling cider, or you are selling food, or you are selling merch, or you are selling event space, or selling an experience, All of these are your business model, not just what's getting made back in your brew house. And that means that all of them require the same level of care and the same level of respect and the same level of education of the stuff that you happen to be making in-house. Now I'm off my soapbox. I had a whole dramatic thing where I jumped off the chair, but again, don't want to bring that. So some core principles for staff education. Baseline. The first, you have to meet people where they're at. At the end of the day, again, we have people who come into this industry from all walks of life. And sometimes you're hiring for the right soft skills or the right background and something that's not directly related to beer. So going into any sort of staff training program with an assumption that everybody's going to have a brewer's level of knowledge is not going to work out for you because they might not be engaging with it at that level yet. That might not be the level of abstraction around beer that they even need to necessarily understand. So meet them where they're at and understand that people are going to be coming into this. It might be their first time really engaging with beer beyond, having a bunch of UC at a college party. And that's okay. They can learn the beer. You're hiring for talent, and you're hiring for people who are motivated and passionate. They don't necessarily need to know that up front. And if you get too technical too quick and start talking about VDK and you start talking about polyphenols like right out of the gate, that's where you're going to lose them. So make sure that you're engaging with people where they are at and understanding that it's okay if that's at a significantly less baseline knowledge than you might expect of someone coming to the brew house. It's also important to focus on the information that they need for their job because at the end of the day, that's what the staff education programs are for. You're trying to help people do their job better, and that means that you need to present the info in a way that's relevant to them. Because what a marketing head needs to understand about the beer, or a salesperson needs to understand about the beer, bar staff needs to understand about the beer is going to be significantly different than what you as a brewer need to understand about the beer. You don't necessarily need to get into all of the same topics, and you need to understand that they're going to need to present that information to customers, to their teams, in a very, very different way than you might be doing if you're talking to a new cellarman or a new assistant brewer. And that's okay. It's also important to recognize that training, it does start at the beginning, but it doesn't end there. A lot of times we see training programs are really just for new hires, and that's really the extent of it. They learn the beers you happen to have on at the moment, they learn maybe some basic SOPs, and then they're on their own, and there's nothing to reinforce that. But training is a continual process. Education is a continual process, and you need to provide the resources there because your menu will change, your business will change, the way you talk about it will change, your customer base will change. You need to make sure that you're reinforcing that because you don't want information to ossify. You don't want somebody who's been with your company for 10 years to still be talking about it the same way they were 10 years ago because you are not the same company that you were 10 years ago. That's not to their detriment. You just need to make sure that you're continuing to reinforce and continue to update those learnings. It's also important to remember that you can't read your way to riding a bike. You know, it's very good to be able to talk to people and present, and I realize the irony of me sitting up here talking for a fucking hour and saying this, but it's important as well to have things that help reinforce that. You know, a picture's worth 1,000 words, well, a pint is worth 1,000,000. It's amazing how advantageous it is to be able to put a beer in front of somebody and use that to help coach them. Give them malt to actually touch, to smell, to taste. Let them do a hop rub. It's one of the reasons I'm a huge advocate of getting everyone on staff in for a brew day. That really helps break those walls down, but it also helps them really appreciate this is a hard job, dangerous job, and there's a lot that goes into it, and who knows, you might spark something. One of those front house staff might really decide that this is something that they want to pursue, and wouldn't you rather have somebody who already understands your company, who's showing that passion, that energy, who can help work to make this entire company, this entire brand better. So get people in there, give them the opportunity to understand that beer's more than words, beer's an experience. It's also important to remember that questions aren't the enemy. You know, we're talking about meeting people where they're at, but people are going to have questions. And, you know, they say there's no such thing as a stupid question. I think we all know that's not necessarily true. But at the end of the day, if someone is asking a stupid question, if you discourage them from asking it, it doesn't mean that they don't have that stupid fucking question. They're just not asking. And that's going to lead to them making assumptions. That's going to lead to them not having the information they need to tell to a customer or a retailer or a wholesaler. You know, a question unasked is not a question unheld. So you need to encourage people to ask those questions. And a lot of times they'll be able to pull information out that you didn't even think to teach. So make sure you're creating those opportunities and creating those opportunities for engagement as well. But the most important thing of all of this is, you know, make it fun. We work in the beer industry, y'all. This should be fun. I know, doing this, I've been doing this most of my adult life. It can be exhausting. It is a job. I know that all of our families think we do nothing but drink all day. Again, ironically, at the end of 2 days of doing nothing but. But this should be fun. If you can't have fun teaching and learning about beer, then you can't have fun with anything. And a lot of folks really do want to have fun learning. This is a hell of a subject to get engaged with and a hell of a subject to learn. So make sure to make it not just rote, not just dry, not just memorization, but something where they can really engage with it and really enjoy it. Now you can take the principles we've just talked about and you can run, at least a little bit of training one way or the other, but let's talk a little about trying to formalize it, because at the end of the day, we want to create predictable results. We want to be able to understand that the training that we're providing is going to have X effect on the people who are receiving it, and that's going to help do their jobs better. So formalizing it a little bit, not even overly so, just some SOPs and some processes that you stick to can go a long way. So how do we do that? Step one, designate a lead trainer. This isn't necessarily a full-time paid position. Believe me, I understand that. We can barely hire enough people to actually brew the damn beer. We sure as hell can't hire a full-time trainer. However, having somebody whose job it is to be the accountability head, really for that training and education, goes a long way, because really what you're trying to do is create an environment of accountability. Accountability that the training is happening, accountability that the training is being received, and accountability that you're doing it the same way every time, so that you're able to really create an environment where everyone is playing from the same playbook. Now, with that in mind, it means that it's not as important to have a lead trainer who's necessarily the most knowledgeable person on staff. It's about having somebody who has the passion, the communication skills, and the discipline to make sure that those things are happening. Again, you can learn beer. Most of us didn't really start learning the technical side of beer until at least we're 21. It's not like this is something most of us are raised with, so it's critical to make sure that you're finding someone who's able to teach properly and able to communicate properly, rather than necessarily just someone who knows a lot about beer. I think we've all made the mistake at some point in time of hiring a salesperson who just really loves beer and then is really, really garbage at that job. It's kind of trial by fire for everybody who opens a brewery. And by the same token, if we're trying to go for predictable results, we also need to have a predictable cadence. So make sure that you have good timing, you know what you're going to be teaching, and that you're setting these regularly. If you're doing quarterly trainings, hold them quarterly. Don't skip it, make the time, it's worth it. If you're holding them monthly, do the same. Make sure that you're doing it either at the same pace for people in their actual jobs, the same cadence from when they start, or the same cadence within the company, but make sure that there is an element to it that you can hold yourselves to as an organization. Otherwise, it's very easy with the 8 trillion other things you have to worry about in a given day to find yourself finding any excuse not to do the training. I've done it myself, it's a hazard. Nick, who works with me in the back, he can very much tell you how distracted I got when we brought him on board. So just because I'm teaching doesn't necessarily mean I'm not prey to the same things. It's also important to make sure that you're not jumping all the way in. So, just where we were talking earlier about making sure that you're meeting people where they're at, focus on the fundamentals to start with. We don't have to go all the way in all the way. But you'd be amazed the number of bartenders who have no idea the ingredients that are in beer. They don't understand the basics of the process. They don't necessarily need to know everything there is to know about the process. They don't need to be able to describe what starting gravity is, but they need to have an understanding of how beer happens, how we go from these core elemental items into something that's a finished product that people can enjoy, because that's the foundation upon which all the other learnings and all the other teaching happens. And again, the same thing goes for every one of the products that you happen to carry. And make sure that you're tailoring that to who you're talking to. Again, salespeople really need to know how to speak to the beer, why it's being produced, what it tastes like, the things that are relevant to a retailer or a customer that they're going to be speaking to. Whereas if you're talking to somebody who's in the brew house, they're going to need to know how it's made, the actual specifics, the dry hopping schedules. So make sure that you're tailoring that information to the audience as well. And one other thing I see happen all the time is beer styles. We as an industry tend to fetishize the living shit out of beer styles. Here's the funny thing about beer styles. They are best when they are descriptive, not prescriptive. And the only time that they are something where you have to stick to that, and that is, the hard and fast rules, is if you're submitting them for a competition and giving that Sierra Nevada Pale Ale won ESB at the last World Beer Cup. Not even then. So when you're talking about beer styles, focus on the way that their audience is going to be engaging with them as well, because customers don't look at styles the way that we do. They don't read BJCP guidelines. They're not learning about all the specific qualitative and quantitative metrics surrounding them. No. They're engaging with them in a far more broad, abstract, descriptive way. It's a way for them to have a rough idea of what they're spending their money on, and that is what's really important for your staff to understand. For a long time, you had kind of this illusion that everybody who drinks craft beer was going to become a Cicerone or a beer judge or a brewer level of knowledge, and that was never realistic. Think of it this way. Does anyone eat fast food in here? Raise your hand. Don't fucking lie. Yeah, we all eat fast food. Even if we don't, there's plenty of things. We probably have cookies in the pantry. You don't know nearly as much about burgers as you do about beer. Everyone is not going to engage with this the way that the maniacs and fanatics in this room do, and that's why we are here. We're here to have that understanding so that we can still guide customers towards an experience that will surprise and delight them. And that means as we're teaching this to our own teams, we need to give them the same set of tools to be able to do that downstream. So one of the chief things I've found is, yes, teach your team about styles, but understand that when they are describing it to customers, they need to be able to describe it in terms that really rely on these broad buckets that customers engage with. And it doesn't have to be exactly like this. This is purely for example, but I know, and you know, that a Kolsch and a Blonde Ale and a Pilsner and a Helles are all very unique, perfect, incredible styles that are completely discrete from each other. To customers, they're the same fucking beer. Every one of them. So make sure that you're not getting so granular to where you're losing the forest for the trees, because even though that's very relevant to you as brewers, and it's very relevant to be able to understand those differences, even to a degree for your team, they also need to bend forward and know how to communicate that and use comparison to find the best path forward for their customers, the people who are going to be buying from them. It's also important not to stop just at the products. We're using beer a lot as an example, but again, this still applies to wine, still applies to seltzer. More than ever, we're all beverage companies, but at the end of the day, we're a hospitality industry with a beer problem, not vice versa. And that's okay, but we also need to remember that we're also a brand. Because marketing sells the first pint of every single beer. They've never tasted it before. How the hell are they supposed to know that that's something that they want to have more of? So you need to make sure that you're communicating that brand forward and building that trust and making sure that you're helping people understand what sets you apart. So don't end at the products. You also need to talk about the company itself. What makes you different? What sets you apart? The history of the company, the storytelling. We are an industry rich with founder stories, and given that we're an industry rich with bearded white dudes like me, that has its own hazards, but it's still important to be able to communicate why your company exists in the first place, what you do better than anyone else. And I don't know if you've noticed or not, but we have 10,000 breweries in the US. It's more important than ever for us to communicate that difference. And not just our difference from each other, but our difference from the bars and restaurants down the street. Because at the end of the day, there's 10,000 breweries, there's about 160,000 bars and restaurants. And given the fact that we're a hospitality industry first and foremost these days, those are our biggest competition. Not the people in this room, not the people at this conference, not even Budweiser anymore. So those venues are really our chief competition. We need to be able to describe succinctly, and our teams need to be able to describe why people should still care. And if you're not able to do that yourself, you sure as hell can't expect your team to either. Comparison's also a critical tool. You might have someone come to the tap room and the classic bartender question, what's your favorite beer? And if they say that their favorite beer is Allagash White, your team needs to understand what that means for the beers that you serve. There's some signals there. Maybe they're really looking for a wheat beer. Maybe you don't have a wheat beer. Maybe you have an American wheat beer. That's probably going to be closest you're going to get, but what if you don't have any wheat beers on at all? Maybe now we need to start looking at what that beer really is. It's a light, refreshing, moresome style. You need to be able to work down that decision tree, and the more that your team's able to understand how these styles relate to each other, how these types of beers relate to each other, that gives them the tools we need. The same goes for sensory. There's a reason that we describe things like hops in terms of citrus and grapefruit and resinous and all these terms that are not actually describing the flavors and the smells at all. What they're doing is using the point of comparison so that we can put words around these things that are really hard to put your finger on. We are notorious as a species for having a really hard time having specific words for things that are not directly related to taste or sight. So we're using these points of comparison to really drive those things home and help people understand. So lean on those. Those are good learning tools. They're in the mind. They help people understand, and they help people retain what they are learning. And if you have a new beer coming out, make sure you're supporting that. Too often we brew a beer and then we hope to God we can sell it. Like we've all been in that position, but it's not just about making sure your marketing team has all the understanding they need. You also need to make sure that your sales team and your bartenders and everyone in the company also has a complete understanding of what beers are coming and why they should care and what they're being produced to do. And I swear, if you're producing beer and you don't know why you're producing it, stop producing it. That was something you can get away with in 2016, not something you can get away with in 2026. I hope we're starting to wake up to that. Now, sensory is also important, but sensory is one of those areas where broadening the scope of people who are learning and understanding also really helps your actual production process as well, because the more palates you have touching your beer and looking out for flaws, looking out for issues, looking out for service problems, the more you're going to be able to control, because no matter how good your palate is as a brewer, there's only so much beer you can taste, and you're going to have your biases, you're going to have your things you're anosmic to, or you just aren't able to pick up at the same threshold as someone else. So the more tongues, for lack of a better term, you can get trying your beer across every phase of the process, the better off you're going to be at spotting that stuff before it reaches a customer. So get your team engaged in sensory. The better you train your staff, the more they're able to help you as a brewer or you as a business really do your jobs. Because we all know that beer doesn't just get screwed up when it's in the tank. It gets screwed up in the packaging line. It gets screwed up in the market. So your sales team needs to know what to look for. Get screwed up in service at those places. Get screwed up in draft. You can have a bad draft line. Like all these things can negatively impact the finished product and the finished experience, most important, that your customers are having. And someone has a bad experience with your beer, it doesn't matter at what point or who's to blame when it got screwed up. They're not coming back. Again, 10,000 breweries, and that grocery store beer is looking really damn appealing if every time they've gone to your place, they're getting something that's a butter bomb. So make sure that you're training your team and you're giving them the tools that they need, that even if they aren't able to identify every compound that might be causing problems, at least they're able to say, hey, this is off. So sensory panel is hugely valuable, but triangle testing is also hugely valuable. It's no secret right now that the raw materials market is volatile as hell. It's almost like global trade got disrupted and completely screwed everything up over the last year and a half or something. But it also means that reformulation and making adjustments to your recipes is more critical now than ever, and being able to make those adjustments based on availability, contracts, pricing is absolutely critical, but you also need to make sure that you're not having perceptible flavor drift that's going to create issues in the market. So again, doing triangle testing. Is anybody familiar with triangle testing or not familiar with triangle testing? So 3 beers, 2 of them are identical, 1 of them's different. Can people spot the difference? And then if so, which do they prefer? It has to be statistically relevant. So the more people you get involved, the better feedback you're able to get on if this is an outlier or like a lucky guess. So great way of seeing if you're having any sort of drift, even if you're using the same ingredients. We're using agricultural products, hops especially. I mean, Amarillo's never been the same any 2 crops it's ever had. So it's good to be able to have people who are able to tell if those flavors are starting to drift. It's also one of the reasons why a beer library can be so valuable. Being able to save back a little bit of every batch that you do and see how it ages. What's the impact on the flavor and aroma over time? What's its shelf life actually is versus just what you're assuming it is. You'd be amazed with some that don't age nearly as well as you think or age a lot better than you think. It's important to be able to use those as comparison points, batch to batch, even over relatively short periods of time for comparison to see if you've got any drift even over the short term. So using those combination of different sensory techniques and getting everyone involved with a well-trained staff goes a long way towards helping ensure your QA without necessarily needing to have a full lab. Most of us can't afford a full lab. Most of us can barely afford a brewery. So helps immensely to be able to have people's palates and people's experience inform that process. Service is also critical though. So thank you, M. Sauter, on her cartoon over there. But serving and pouring beer is also a critical part. And you need to make sure that people understand what they're doing, because I've seen bartenders who have been bartending for 30 freaking years and can't pour beer properly. Blows my mind the number of even brewery bartenders who are going to dip the whole damn faucet in, and it drives me up a wall. And that's a problem. Ideally, they'd be able to change kegs too, and if you got a really well-trained staff, they can even do the lines, but as long as they're not screwing with the regulators. Never mess with my regulator. I think even my 4-year-old daughter knows never to touch daddy's regulator. But, it's extreme. But pouring beer is absolutely critical, and teaching your staff how to do so from the get-go helps improve the experience for everybody, improves the beer quality, ensures there's no draft line infections. Glassware, okay, we have sister on here. Glassware is not nearly as important as we pretend it is. It's not going to impact the flavor of the beer nearly as much as it feels, but it can impact the experience. If you're having something in a really nice tulip, is it going to be hugely noticeably different than serving it in a shaker pint? Not to a huge degree, but it does feel more refined. It feels more intentional. And even if all you're doing is running everything through shaker pints, it's still good to have people understand, how to pour beer, what to look for. If you got bubbles in there, that's a sign that you're probably not getting things clean. These are good key things to look for, and it's important for people to know it. And if you do have glassware, they need to know what goes in what, so that you're having a consistent experience every time. How is your service flow? That's a key one when you're, GM. If you're operating any sort of taproom operation, they need to understand how to use your point of sale system. They need to understand the questions they need to ask of their staff. Did you know if you ask people if they want to take anything home with them at the end of their service, their chances of taking something home with them goes up 90%. That's not a small amount from one question. If you see someone who's getting about 2/3 down the glass, asking them if they want something else goes a long way towards ensuring one more pint. It's amazing how much average check value gets underrated as a metric for actual success for once people are across the threshold in your tap room. But your staff needs to understand what's expected of them. They need to understand how to execute it, because yes, there are soft skills, but just because someone's good with people doesn't mean they're good at bartending. And you can very easily have a talkative, loudmouth, extroverted person like me who will lock down somebody at the end of the bar for like 3 hours and give everybody else a terrible experience. So make sure that you're teaching service as well. And most of us have food now. And if you don't have food, you sure as hell considered it. And you probably are doing food trucks or something else along those lines. Again, this is an area where you don't want to overdo. We're not trying to make everybody read Brewmaster's Table or do the full courses that Morella Amato has online for beer and food pairing, but we do need to make sure that if we have any sort of foods that we do want to make sure go with other things, or a primary place that we're making recommendations in the case that someone doesn't know what they want to order. Most restaurants, for all the jokes around wine people, if you order a cab sauv and you're ordering fish, they're just going to let you do it. At the end of the day, people should be able to order what they want, but so often people say, what should I order? It's good to know what's going to lead to people have the best experience if they don't have strong feelings or if they don't have any priors walking in the door. So make sure that your team understands that, but even more importantly, make sure that you're also teaching them about the food you offer. They should understand as much about your menu as they do about your beer, because that is still something that you are crafting, that is still something you are selling, that's still something that impacts whether or not someone wants to come back. And at the end of the day, that's really what it is, because our regulars, our repeat customers, that's what keeps the lights on. One-off customers are great when you're selling, hazy pints and you have lines out the door and people were camping out and shitting each other for your imperial stout that's been in barrels for 1.5 years. No one does that anymore, y'all. We've entered the mainstream now. So we have to make sure that they're having a great experience and that they're coming back time and time again and recommending your place to other people downstream. Word of mouth is critical in this industry. And then last, make sure that you're actually talking about what's happening in the industry as well. So everyone was here for Chris Shepard's keynote this morning. You're all nodding your heads. Some of you were too drunk to be here. No, let's kid ourselves. But hey, I'm still sure you're drunk now. But Chris did an excellent job of really describing what's happening in the industry. We have entered a period of doomerism, even amongst ourselves, that is absolutely crippling. Guys, we are bigger than we were 3 years ago as an industry. We have a closure rate that is like 1/3 that of traditional bars and restaurants. And for all the problems that we may have, The average length of time before a brewery closes is about twice that of a traditional bar and restaurant. We're actually in pretty good shape, even if it is heading the wrong direction. I'm not saying this to pump you up or treat it as a non-reality that things are harder than they've been in a long time. What I'm saying is your staff is going to feel all that, but they're going to have even less context. And you need to be able to discuss this stuff with them because you're a chief vision officer more than you are anything else when you're leading a company. So you need to be able to set that tone and engage with them and be honest with them about the hard things that are happening in the industry, because that might put some limitations on you and your business, but also bring them in. Talk to them about what this looks like. Help them understand why you might not be able to do this big flashy event that they have in their mind they think is going to be great, but the market just doesn't exist for that anymore. The more you're able to bring them in and help them understand, the more they're able to come up with ideas that are workable, because the more that you're able to get your whole team engaging in entrepreneurship and engaging in creating the experience and future of your business, the less it relies on you as a brewer or an entrepreneur or a manager or anyone in this industry to try and do it all on their own, because that's something we all have a tendency to fall in. We're used to having to be scrappy, but it doesn't mean we have to be scrappy by ourselves. A few tips and tricks. First, accountability. I mentioned it a few times here, but make sure that you're holding yourselves accountable for executing this training, but also that you're holding your staff accountable for engaging in it. Now, if you're going to be having people do any sort of training, it has to be paid, either during their normal shift, or you have to be providing the time and energy for them to do so. So if you're asking someone to read a book, I'm sorry, it's going to happen on shift or it's not going to happen, but it's okay for you to have even just a remedial test to make sure that they actually got the info. It can be something as simple as your trainer just validating, yeah, they get it, but it can be valuable to have that little test just to check their thinking and make sure that they understand. Who here has ever taken mandatory sexual harassment training at a job before? You know how they always have a test, and even though it's all the most basic stuff in the world, it's mostly to make sure that you're not just fucking around on your phone while the videos are going. It's the same thing. You're just trying to make sure that they understand. It's not about trying to trick anyone, but there's even some valor in having a program like the Certified Beer Server program, from Cicero. That's not designed to be a hard test. It's designed to show people that they have the baseline of information to be able to serve and operate within the brewery. It does a pretty good job of that. It's even affordable. It's also good to, if someone does show some of that inspiration to want to continue their training, if that's something you see value in, if you think that them continuing that learning and continuing to pursue that path is beneficial to you and the company, it can be good to help cover some of that. Cicerone is not cheap. There's a lot of training materials, a lot of stuff that goes into that, but it can lead to people who, even if the actual Cicerone certification doesn't have a huge advantage for your business, having somebody who's that engaged and that passionate and that knowledgeable can. Same goes for BJCP judge certification. Same can even go for professional certifications that have nothing to do with beer. That learning can really be valuable, and there's nothing wrong with formalized systems. Any of our Beer 30 customers also get 20% off training materials from Cicerone, so just saying. I've mentioned it before, it's also critical to get people in the brew house, get them around that environment, have them understand what's happening back there. We are not breweries first and foremost. We are tap rooms with breweries as part of the business first and foremost, but that doesn't mean that's any less important to get them back there, because that is part of our brand identity. That's part of our differentiation. That's part of what makes us different than every other bar and restaurant out there, and it's important for people to have an understanding of the fact that that is not just turning a handle and your beer magically comes out the other side. Unless you got a really fancy brow pound automated system, in which case it's exactly like that. But for most of us, we're lifting grain bags. It's a dirty job, it's a hard job, it's an elegant job, it's a beautiful job, it's a crippling job, and it's something that requires a lot of passion and energy, and waking up at 5 a.m. and stressing the hell out and breaking your back to do. And it's amazing how much you can get people invested and interested if you get them back there even for a little while. That it's not about turning everybody into brewers, it's about getting everybody interested. It's one of the reasons why I love the Pink Boots Brew Days. This is an opportunity for a lot of women who are grossly underrepresented on the brewing side, even if they're overrepresented in the front of house, to get back there and engage with beer in a way they normally don't get the opportunity to, but it applies to all of your staff. And the more you're able to do that, the better. It's also important to provide educational resources. So this is actually one of the easiest ones. I've never met a brewer who doesn't have at least bare minimum 35 freaking books about beer, and you're probably never cracking them open again. Make those available for the staff. Last brewery that I ran myself, this was about 3 years ago, I had all my 80 plus beer books all available for anybody to check out. I kept a little spreadsheet just so I know they weren't running off with them, but anybody could borrow them. I wanted them to get used. I'm not going to crack open my copy of Tasting Beer again. It's been a while. So I'd much rather have someone be able to make use of that, and if it helps them engage and continue their learning, that's a very low barrier to entry for people to be able to really educate themselves. Yeah, this is actually a picture of my shelf, by the way. One other thing that is critical, and this is one that if anybody's ever met Chris Guzman from Pure Project, he was the first person I ran into who really kind of formalized this, even though it's existed forever, but created the brand Bible and the brew Bible. Any of your beers, especially the ones you're going to be running regularly, print out copies of one sheeters, and they don't have to be like a formal sales sheet, but they need to have all the info that your front of house and your sales staff need to understand about that beer, just for quick reference. It's good for them to have just a quick binder to be able to flip through and be able to refer to so that you don't have to keep everything up here, you don't have them fooling around on their phones. And for the brand Bible, the same. You want them to have an understanding of, what your brewery's about, the history of it. If they need to remember what year you were founded, we all have brain farts. It's good to have that stuff behind the bar, have it back in the brew house, and have that available for any of your sales staff if they need it. It doesn't take that much time to put together. You probably have all that information together anyways. And if you just keep up with it as you introduce new products, very, very easy to keep that going. And then remember, at the end of the day, we are educating our staff because our customers won't be. That's really why we're doing this. We are learning these things so that we're able to guide people to a good experience, even if the only way that they do engage with craft beer is because they happen to be, needing a hinge date there and, those are the closest venue to their house. That's okay. We need to be able to guide people to the best experience possible because that's how we keep them engaged in this project of craft beer that we in this room make our livelihood off of and that we are passionate about. Some recommended resources as well. If you're looking for some valuable books, some valuable resources, blogs, places that you can go that have some of this educational content without having to recreate the wheel, some great stuff on here. Feel free to screenshot. I'm not going to go through every one of them. Also, if you have any sales staff, one that's been required reading from my team for years, even though I don't have it up here, is That Shit Will Never Sell from David Gluckman. He's the guy behind Bailey's and 10x10 and basically every other innovation project Diageo had for like 40-year period. Fantastic book if you're trying to market and sell beverage products. Any questions? It's been a whole lot of me running on mouth. How's everyone doing today?
Great job, man.
Great. Well, I'm glad I nailed it the first time. No one had a single question. That's really good for my ego. But no, appreciate everybody. If you do think they go, okay.
So, like you said, not everybody wants to pay or compensate to do the trainings because everything, everything's so marginalized.
Well, and when I think of breweries, I think of tons of free cash.
Exactly. How do you open a brewery? Or how much money do you need to start a brewery? $2 million. Yeah, that joke. But like, how, I don't know, I guess how can you reframe it in your mind to, like, that is super important, like a practical way to think about it.
Honestly, so general staff education is actually very low bar. Most of that requires no cost. You just have to build the discipline and the SOPs around it. It's part of the reason for this. But if you're talking about more formalized programs, it's an investment. But I run the whole revenue side of a multi-million-dollar software company for a day job. Like, I have to justify every fucking penny I spend for myself as much as anybody else. So it's a matter of showing that those programs are going to have an ROI. Now, it can be long-term. It can be an investment in your team, investment in them sticking around. One thing I do think is valid, if you're going to be paying for someone to take the Cicerone, having a work requirement. So that's actually very typical of corporate America. We'll pay for a degree, but you have to stick around for 3 years post-graduation. I think that's entirely reasonable, making it to where somebody, if you're going to be investing in them, they're invested in your organization. But outside of that, being able to show that this is something that will create outsized value, whether it's through them being able to do their job better or greater notoriety for the brewery, I do think it's harder to justify certified Cicerone above than it used to be. But again, there are tons of scholarships out there, grant money a lot of times, professional professional development grants for your team. Back when I was consulting, I used to make a killing off of towns giving very poorly vetted grants to breweries to train their sales teams. So there's a lot of that out there that provides free money for professional development, and that can be a great place to spend it, an actual quality place to spend it.
So a little bit of experience that I had, when we first opened, one of our business objectives was to have all the beer vendors take the Cicerone Certified Beer Trainer course. So I purchased like 20 of the certificates, right? And so we put them all through it, and what I found was, and I paid for it, obviously, I paid for them to do the course, I paid for the time that they did it, and about half of them passed the course, and about half of them did not. And it was like really hard for me to get them to actually do it in the time frame that I wanted it done. And I looked into like, okay, should I have done it as a prerequisite to being hired? Because I paid for them anyway. Do I invest in a prerequisite? Do I hire them and do it afterwards? So I still have credits.
Yeah.
Was a Cicerone, and I stopped doing that because I feel like they did still learn it. Like even though they didn't pass it, because it was the problem I had, even when I took it, I'm like, I ran out of time. I was lucky I passed and it was like an 80, but like I ran out of time. I don't think they all realize that like it's very time to pass.
So I got a couple of things there. One is I have a term for people who I hire with a very, well laid out and well cadenced requirement for something that they need to do who don't do it, the health former employees. That's very hard as small businesses. I know that sounds correct, but if that's a requirement that has been made of them, it's a low bar to hit. It's not about the ease or the difficulty of the test. It is not that hard to study for that. I did a shit face at 11 a.m. on a Wednesday. Don't ask why I was shit faced at 11 a.m. on a Wednesday, but like the certified beer server course, like if they're just not doing it, then there's a lot they're probably not doing. It has very little to do with the test and the fact that those are going to be the people least likely to be doing the roads at the end of the night, least likely to do silverware if we've got a food program, least likely to be doing cleaning to the degree they need to. They're going to mop around the major sections and then leave all the tables completely unmopped under it. That's a pretty low bar to hit for me.
So then do you require it before they get hired?
I would no. You cannot require it before they get hired. You can make it a hiring requirement somewhere you do not hire someone without it. You cannot require someone to do it before getting hired, but you can make it a job requirement. That's not unreasonable as long as they have time to study. That is paid. That is something that is required. So typically I'll either pay for the staff to do it, and I will give them study time on shift, or I'm not hiring anybody without it. These days I feel like craft beer for the most part has become enough within the main where a lot of that baseline knowledge is pretty easy to come by. For me, it's more about showing the discipline. One thing I'll also say with the Cicerone program, since David and Jason took it over, very easy to work with. If anybody needs a contact, I can put you in contact with them, but people are going to do like bulk credits on something like that, you can usually get a discount. They're more than happy to work with people. Yeah, and WSET has a big beer program now. Marilla Amato, who's Master Cicerone, runs that. She's great. She's supposed to be here. I think she got waylaid in Canada, but oh, was she here yesterday? Asshole, she didn't come and say hi. But there's some good programs out there. Awesome. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much, y'all. See you at the award ceremony.